Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Never Too Late Functional Core Training for Seniors. This is our webinar hosted by Exercise, Etc., and we're happy that you have joined us for the next 2 hours. Since you'll be hanging out with me here, I'd like to give you a little bit of an introduction on myself. My name is April Bolter, and I've been with Exercise, Etc. for a number of years. And so if you have ever been in any of our live sessions, you probably remember me from Chicago. For about the past 10 years, I lived in Chicago and worked at Loyola University Chicago. I had a dual role there, which was a really great opportunity because it really gave me a wide sense of what all was going on in the world of exercise physiology. One area I worked in was a faculty member in the Department of Exercise Science, and then the second area that I was lucky enough to work in was the program director of campus recreation. So I oversaw all of the fitness, aquatics, recreational sports, and all of the activities that came with a comprehensive wellness program on campus. So now a little bit of info on my education. I have a Master's of Education in Sport Management with an emphasis in sport psychology and an MPH in Policy and Management, and I'm currently in the process of finishing my PhD in Prevention Science. So I've spent a lot of time here recently looking at the intersection of childhood obesity and trying to find out what we can do to hopefully be able to mitigate that problem that we're seeing within, overweight children turning into overweight adults. So if you ever are working in any of those areas, I always love to talk to some of our different participants at Exercise, Etc., and share ideas. That is the one downside about working with a webinar is that we don't get to see each other and talk to each other. So at the very end, I will give you my email address. That way, if you have a question as you're implementing some of these strategies, or maybe if you are, maybe you've run into a client, something that isn't within the scope of this webinar, please feel free to email me. If I don't know the answer, I'm fairly certain I can find someone who does. The great thing about our exercise science faculty is we have a large variety of people that teach with us. So the great thing is I can kick it out to all of them, and either them or some of my colleagues in the Department of Exercise Science, somebody will probably know the answer to your question, hopefully. So I'm always happy to help in any way possible, and I think that's one of the great things about Exercise, Etc., is that we are quite a community here. So without further ado, let's hit the nitty-gritty before we jump into our core training webinar. Now, let's be honest, I like to call a spade here. You're probably here for your continuing education certificate. So in order to obtain your continuing education certificate, the first thing that you have to do is to view this complete webinar. Now, please make sure that your printer is turned on, and if you don't have a printer attached to your computer, no worries. We're going to talk about what that means here in just a moment. But then go to our website at www.exerciseetc.com, and you're going to click on the Administration tab. From there, please click on the Webinar On Demand Certificates. Now, there's going to be a number of options of things that you're going to have to fill out. So please go ahead and complete all of those fields and then click Submit. Now, once you click Submit, your continuing education certificate will appear on the screen. So from there, you can either print it or save it to your desktop if you do not have a working printer. The thing is if you do not save it to your desktop, then you're not going to be able to go back in and get a copy of that certificate. So either print it or save it to your desktop and then email it to yourself. But you do have to complete this form right after you complete the webinar. The reason is if you don't complete it, then we may not have the proper date on it, and that can get really hairy depending upon when your certification expires. So always make sure that you do that right after completing the webinar here. Now, also, please note that the WebEx software that we utilize does record when you log on and log off. So logging off early or fast-forwarding could potentially result in the denial of your continuing education certificate. So please keep all of those things in mind as you're viewing this webinar and preparing to obtain your continuing education certificate. As an added reminder, you're going to need to complete this webinar and fill out the form and print your certificate by December 31st of this year. So certificates with next year's date or dates past your certification date may not be accepted by your credentialing organization. So we do ask you to go ahead and complete all of this right away. Remember that Exercise Etc. does not have the ability to change the dates on your certificates, so please be mindful of that as we start to move into this webinar. Now, here are our main objectives that we are going to be covering over our next 2 hours in the Never Too Late Functional Core Training for Seniors webinar. After viewing this webinar, you will be able to describe the functions of the core, list ways to modify a core program for your senior population, compare and contrast the function of the inner unit and the outer unit of the core muscles, describe various exercises that encourage a neutral spine while seated, standing, and walking, and explain ways to use various modalities such as elastic tubing to build your inner and outer unit of your core stability. So as we move through all of those, I want you to take a minute right now, and I want you to think about all of your clients that you're going to be working with. So I want you to think about your most capable client. That's the senior, of course. And think about all of the things that they accomplish. Then I want you to think about your least capable client. With all of these exercises, I ask that you really take a moment to examine how you can modify these to meet all of your different populations. How can you potentially make it more challenging for your capable client and less challenging for your less capable client? So we do want to let you know that these activities are designed for active and functional seniors that are living independently. So these are not designed for the frail elders or anyone suffering from chronic or disabling diseases. Now, if you have any clients that are in a pain management program, you need to have them speak with their provider, their primary care physician, because these types of programs are not designed to work within people that are in a pain management program. So these are especially not suitable for seniors that are a fall risk, because please keep in mind that a fall isn't just life-altering for our seniors, it's really and truly life-threatening. So as we look through all of these different odds and ends, so let's really jump in and think about what are we here to do. As we look at the functional core training, we have to first look at what are the functions of the core. So there's some really basic functions here that we have listed for you. So all of the things that the core can accomplish are things like stability, movement, posture, breathing, the joint stabilization, and the energy transfer. And all of those are really important aspects of what the core can accomplish. And think about all of those things that are listed there. That's what, 6 items? So those are things that are listed, and almost all of those have to deal with an individual in a standing, at least a seated, but definitely a standing position. So then, why do people train core on the floor? It just does not make sense. Now, you know, we could really debate the whole definition of functional core training till we're blue in the face, or even just functional training. You know, if you've been with me for all of these webinars, something that I said in another webinar earlier was, you know, functional training has been around for a long time. In the first definition of functional training, people wanted you to stand on a Bosu ball and do an overhead press, or sit on a stability ball and do bicep curls. Now, if you've been working in fitness for the last 20 years, then you're probably laughing right now because you remember whenever things like the IDEA conference came out and said this, and the ACSM conferences came out and they did this. And that's just not functional. Now, here's the deal. I've been working in fitness and wellness for the last 19 years of my life. And in 19 years, I have never once been asked to sit down on something and press something over my head. That's not functional. That's not a movement we would do. And like I said, I work in fitness. So what we want to look at is how can we train the core in ways that they're actually going to be able to put into play in their everyday living. And the core really runs on a reflex base here. So a lot of the movements that the limbs are doing throughout the day are very structured. They're controlled movements, and they're generally really planned. You know, we're reaching into the back seat of the car to grab a handbag. We're putting something on the top shelf, perhaps a dish or something that we've gotten out. And the core muscular are engaged by reflexes, by responses to your everyday actions, and then your reactions as well. So the core is really reflex-driven. And if we make an attempt to put it on the core, your core training on the floor, then essentially what we're doing is we are making those movement patterns very shortened, and we're not using the efficiency that the body needs. So we want to make sure that our body can stabilize the spine and provide the stability that it needs in order to really be able to move through those different movements, such as reaching into the back seat or putting a dish on the top shelf. You know, what really disrupts the optional functioning of the core is really, you know, fivefold, not just twofold or threefold. It's really fivefold. Because a lot of the things that happen is because we have limitations in flexibility or maybe asymmetries that exist in the body. So we may be more right dominant than left dominant, or maybe muscle imbalances from the front to the back of the body. So whenever these muscle imbalances occur, then unfortunately we're going to have compensations that happen within the body. And that's really going to interrupt the natural sequencing and the timing of how the muscles are activated. So I want you to think about how we can establish a really focused and targeted core stability program that is going to really be able to correct those compensations. We also want to make sure that we're giving the appropriate amount of time to core training. You know, oftentimes people completely forget to add core training into their workouts, or perhaps maybe they ignore it. So that's something that we want to ensure that all of our trainers that do their continuing education through exercise, et cetera, are able to focus on and are able to really make an important part of their training programs. So we want to look at how are we going to create a functional core training program. Now remember at the very beginning I asked you to think about your different clients. And for every client, they're going to have a different type of program. So function is really going to mean something different to different people. But our sole goal is to improve movement. We really want to focus on that efficiency. So we want to be able to assess a client's level of functional competency. And whenever we do that, one of the best ways that we can do that is through a comprehensive movement screen. So we talked a little bit in some previous lectures, if you're following the whole program here of our senior training program, then we talked a little bit about some movement screens. And if you don't have any background in movement screens, then I encourage you to email me. And like I said, I'm going to give you my email address at the end of the webinar, because the American Council on Exercise, they have done a fantastic job of putting together a wonderful movement screen checklist. And I'd be happy to share that with you. It's in a PDF form. That way you can understand about what are we looking at as far as functional competency. Are people able to move appropriately? And that is what we have to have a baseline. So once you can use the movement screens to assess your client's level of functional competency, then we can start to build a foundation. You know, you've probably seen a trainer somewhere in some gym that has done a body fat analysis, they've done a push-up test to test their strength, they've probably weighed their clients, and then boom, they're out on the floor. They're doing squats with the bar. You know, they're doing overhead presses with 5-pound dumbbells. And from the naked eye, that probably doesn't seem like a lot. But if you haven't built the foundation to help our clients learn how to move appropriately, then all you're doing is compounding those compensations. So we have to build that foundation first. We do not want to develop the compensations, and in fact, what we want to do is to really eliminate them. That way we are not encouraging our behavior and our clients to adapt to an altered or faulty sense of movement. So our seniors don't need to be stable on the floor. They really need to be stable when they're upright. And that's what we're going to be focusing on here. There's not going to be a single exercise where you're going to put your clients down on the ground. And if you've worked with a lot of seniors, you're probably really thankful for that. I know one of my favorite clients that I've worked with at Loyola University, she was about 72 years old. She was obese, and she was terrified of getting up and down. She was terrified to get on the ground. If she ever got on the ground, she just knew she could never get back up. And that was actually one of the things that we worked on. You know, we're going to talk about rolling patterns here in just a minute, but that was something that we worked on because we wanted to be able to develop the movements to keep her body upright, but we also wanted to develop the musculature to move in different planes. That way, if she did wind up on the floor, she would have developed those muscles in order to be able to roll appropriately. So we have to start our clients training upright. That way they can work in all three movements, in all three planes. Then if they want to do things like basic crunches or floor exercises, then we know that they have the foundation built. So that's what we're going to be looking at with all of our programs and all of our exercises that we're going to be talking about. So as we start to look at this, you know, integrating a senior core program, we want to talk about what is the primary goal of any exercise program for any of your seniors, and then how are we going to improve our core stabilization. Number one, all of our seniors need to be exercising daily. Now, this does not mean going out for a 5-mile jog. It doesn't mean that they have to be doing vigorous exercise, but they need to be having a moment of daily exercise that is elevating their heart and that is challenging their musculoskeletal system. We need to have them doing weight-bearing exercises in a standing position. We want to make sure that nothing that they are doing from the exercise standpoint is causing them pain. So one of the number one things to avoid is flexion first thing in the morning. So no flexion of the hips, no flexion of the spine first thing in the morning, because it takes a moment, and this could be people of any age, but it oftentimes takes a moment to get warmed up. And whenever they first wake up, we want to ensure that our clients are going to be in a great space for movement. And that space to start exercising is not right whenever they get out of the bed. We want to make sure that we add lots of walking. You know, I don't know if we still have the statistic handy, but whenever you look at the number of steps that the average senior citizen takes per day, so your average senior citizen takes less than 1,500 steps per day. And this is a retired senior. Takes less than 1,500 steps per day. So if you think about the recommended 10,000 steps per day, and then our average retired senior is taking about 1,500, that is terrifying. That is, you know, the least amount of movement that you can really accomplish, you know, if you're just getting out of bed, walking to the bathroom, walking to the kitchen, things of that sort. So we need to ensure that we are adding a lot of walking to our senior citizens program. And additionally, something that is really important is we want to be patient. Results with this population are not predictable. So we don't know how their body's going to react. Some days they may be extra tight. Their joints may be under a little bit of stress. The next day they may feel great and they may want to take all 10,000 steps that are recommended. But please note that we cannot, you know, have a crystal ball to see what's going to go on with these programs. We encourage you to be really truthful with your clients about we're going to continuously reevaluate to see where we are and what we've accomplished. So those are some of our primary goals whenever we're looking at improving the core stabilization of our senior clients. Now here we go, is how do we want to improve function? You know, if we're looking at functional core training for our seniors, how do we improve that function? So for proper preventative measures, we really need to focus on a complete exercise program. Now, oftentimes our seniors will tell us, you know, oh, I don't want to do that, or I don't like doing that. That's too hard. I hear that a lot. But we need to make sure that we have a comprehensive program. And that includes everything from our cardiovascular, our strength training, our flexibility training. There's so many different areas. And now that we are starting to work within our senior population, we need to ensure that they are hitting all of them. You know, a sedentary lifestyle is really counterproductive to independence. So whenever we're having our clients that want to be living on their own, that don't want to go into our assisted living centers, then that's something that we want to ensure is really on the forefront of their mind, is that we need to be up. We need to be able to move. That way you can attack those activities of daily living and be successful. Also, it's something great to let all of your clients know that a proper stretching, strengthening, and body mechanics are all going to ward off atrophy, or whenever the muscles waste away, that's what atrophy is, and that really shortens the recuperation time. So if we are able to keep our clients properly stretched, strengthened, then and in proper alignment, then that's going to shorten any recuperation either from an illness, maybe they're going to have a hip replacement or a knee replacement. So we want to make sure that everything that we are doing is really focusing on maintaining that life of independence. That way we can really start to match all of our exercise with different conditions such as low back pain that can potentially be causing any other problems. So these are what we're looking at as we are trying to improve the function of all of our senior clientele. So every program that you are developing for your population, make sure that it fits these guidelines. And that's really what's going to be the best marker of success. So here we are looking at functional core training and what is the goal of this core training. And number one, we want to look at how we're going to create stability in the presence of movement. You know, the example that I gave earlier were sitting in the car and reaching into the back seat to grab your handbag. So how do we create stability without causing any pain in the presence of movement, such as the bend and twist to grab something in the back seat? And we want to make sure that everything has the integrity, proper alignment, and control in order to ensure that stability happens. And a lot of people assume, incorrectly in fact, that performing these traditional exercises for the abdominal muscles is going to provide you a stable core. So if you can do, 50 crunches, then your core is able to stabilize. And that's not true, because stability refers to the use of muscular timing and being able to control the muscles and the sequence of the firing in order to maintain a stable spine, especially in the presence of the arm and leg movements. So it's really important that we establish this stability before strength. If the movers activate first, then the stabilizers become dysfunctional. So, as the hips start to produce a lot of movement and power, so if those hips are the ones that are activating, are taking the lion's share, then our stabilizers, our core is going to be dysfunctional. And that's a lot of times where we see this low back pain. So as you are starting to work with your clients, you really want to see and make sure that you are watching for the signs of fatigue. So are your clients starting to hold their breath, or maybe use their hips instead of the core, or use momentum? That's the number one modification that I see with clients, is whenever they try to start to use their hips to produce movement. And that is the number one thing that we want to be aware of, and also to be able to understand how and when it's important to focus on the stabilization, and how and when it's important to focus on the movement. All right, let's talk a little bit about what muscles are going on and what is happening with stability. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at here is the diaphragm. So true core stability has to start with that diaphragm. So we want to look from the inside out. Think about as you breathe in. So wherever you are right now, get here somewhere comfortable, and I want you to take a big breath in through the nose and make sure that that breath goes all the way down to that belly. So inhale through the nose as big as you can. Notice that that chest expands. You probably feel those ribs stretching out and lengthening. You can see that diaphragm is already starting to contract as the chest expands. So now, as you exhale out, the chest relaxes and contracts back down. It shrinks back in size, and those lungs are compressed. And that, with all of the other stuff, is when the diaphragm relaxes. So we really want to talk about how the diaphragm has a role in stability. And that diaphragm contracts and pushes the abdominal cavity down. So when those are combined with the resistance that's created in the pelvic floor, then that's really how we want to create that intra-abdominal pressure. We also want to really focus on being able to increase the pressure in the front of the spine. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to teach you guys right now how we're going to build our belt, which is how we're going to stabilize the core. This is going to teach you how to use that resistance in the pelvic floor, how to utilize the abdominal cavity, and how to create the pressure in the front of the spine. So I'm going to talk you through the whole concept of building the belt, which usually includes a lot of the feet movement. And I'm going to glaze over the feet movement, but I want you to understand how everything is connected and grounding your body for stabilization. So that's why the feet are important. But if you have more questions, feel free to email me, because like I said, this is a little bit of a shortened version with the feet. So wherever you are, I want you to find a comfortable spot of standing. So think about your feet being about hip width apart. And lift up your toes, standing flat-footed, lift up your toes, widen those toes, and then put them down so that each toe has its own space on the floor or its own space in your shoe. So now that you have your foot, so your toes have its own space and they're kind of gripping onto the floor, what I want you to do is to transfer that energy up. So now what I want you to do is to take your thumb and put it on your lowest rib and your middle finger and put it on your hip bone. So now, without moving forward, so you cannot contract, you cannot press against that thumb, what I want you to do is to engage the abdominal wall. So draw in that belly as if I'm going to punch you in the stomach. But like I said, you can't crunch forward. So don't use the rectus abdominis. Just use that transverse abdominis, that very inner unit, to really contract that core. Because like I said, you can't crunch forward, don't press against the thumbs. Now that that intra-abdominal unit, that transverse abdominis has been activated, and you're upright, still very upright, what I want you to do now is maintain that pressure in the core. Now I want you to draw in your pelvic floor. And these are the muscles that you would utilize to stop yourself from urinating. So upright right here, draw in that pelvic floor, keep it all engaged. The abdominal could take a punch. This right here is your unit of stabilization. Now relax, take a big breath. We're going to do it again. So thumb on the lowest rib, middle finger on the hip, inhale through the nose. As you exhale, lock that stomach in, activate that transverse abdominis like I'm going to punch you. Don't crunch forward, maintain the upright posture though. Now draw in that pelvic floor. Like I said, muscles that are used to stop yourself from urinating. Now in this stabilized position right here, what I want you to do is to do an overhead press with your hands. So just press them up. See how hard it is as you're moving and adding movement to that body? As you're adding that movement to the body here, think about how that movement causes your core to want to relax. And this is what you have to kind of fight. Don't let that happen. All right, now take a breath, relax. So that provides the information that you need to understand about how we're creating that pressure in the front of the spine. So without that proper pressure and without that stabilization, then we're not going to be able to really support that lumbar spine. And our inner abdominal pressure is not going to be able to stabilize the lower lumbar spine either. So that's where we want to really make sure that the core, the breathing, the diaphragm, and our belt is engaged. And this is really a key component to core stability. All right, now let's look at how this core muscle firing sequence should really look. So we just talked about how we built our belt, so how we stabilize the far inner unit, such as our transverse abdominis. And that transverse abdominis and the inner side of that must be the ones that fire first. So that's what we do to create the stability. Then the outer unit, the rectus abdominis and the oblique muscles can then fire and create our movement. When these larger global muscles fire first, then our stability is really decreased. Now, oftentimes looking at torque and other forces that are placed on the joints and the connective tissue, as that increases, then a lot of times our body forgets how to stabilize itself. And we have to always go back to focusing on that inner unit. We need to improve our firing sequence with things like reactive neuromuscular training and even primitive patterns such as rolling in order to really help our clients understand what that firing sequence should look at. Honestly, rolling is the most basic form of rotation. It's how we learn to move as an infant. So that's one of the first things that your body learns and understands how to do. Now, when these deep core muscles become dysfunctional, the outer unit and other prime movers are going to start to dominate movement patterns instead of our internal unit. So think about it this way. I'll give you an example. Look at a cable rotation. So you're going to use a cable cross for your rotation movement for a chop or something. Now, essentially, a person can really cheat by allowing the deltoids or the pecs or even the lats to really perform that movement as well as be the stabilizers. Now, all this is going to do is weaken the true stabilizers, which is your core. So here's what we want to create, a really safe pattern for focusing on that core training. That way we are not increasing the dysfunctional movement patterns of having things like the deltoids, pecs, and lats be those movers as well as stabilizers. So we have to be able to allow our inner unit to stabilize properly. We have to have our clients understand how to build that belt and how to really focus on supporting the spine in a positive way that's really going to make our movements the most efficient as possible. Like we said earlier, this reactive neuromuscular training is the best way to be able to help our clients understand what the firing sequence should be. So reactive neuromuscular training, and this is kind of a little bit of the rotational training, think of rolling patterns, is really going to force individuals to fire muscles appropriately. So if they're doing something such as not utilizing the core, really exaggerate the mistake the individual is making. So if they're utilizing the arm or the shoulder to make a movement happen, then take that arm and shoulder out of the equation. Either make them hold it down by their side or something so that they're able to exaggerate and see where the issue is coming up. That way they can understand how to properly fire those muscles. Our goal here is to create a greater proprioceptive awareness of the poor timing. And this is really going to help them in understanding exactly how the motor learning process should work and really accelerate that whole process. The great thing about having them, especially as a trainer, if we're really exaggerating these mistakes, then this can be a lot more beneficial than just verbal cueing alone, because this way they're learning how to correct themselves in order to really enhance that mind-body connection. So we always want to check those things out, because when the prime movers activate first, then the stabilizers have no chance to perform their role. And this helps really activate those muscles properly before the movement actually occurs. So keep in mind, whenever we're working on some of these rotational patterns, if they are not utilizing the core, then we really want to exaggerate those mistakes to really focus and hone in on that motor learning. Our first goal here is looking at mobility and function. And our first rolling pattern or rotation pattern is going to be looking at this thoracic rotation. If you look at all of the studies that have been done, there is no evidence that says that improving lumbar range of motion is going to improve performance or decrease pain. And think of it this way. An overstretched muscle is a weak muscle. So this muscular weakness is really the root of a lot of back problems, and is also the root cause of a lot of inhibited movement patterns. So strength training of the core is what we want to focus on. And we also want to focus on improving mobility of the hips and the shoulders in order to improve performance and decrease the pain that some of our clients may be seeing. So as we look at this, as we're looking at, most people really grab something and try to rotate from the lumbar spine. We want to focus on movement through the thoracic rotation. And we're going to be utilizing this exercise a little bit further down and building upon this. So as you see what our model is doing here, so she has her foot up on that jump box, and she is keeping that hip in a neutral position. And that's one of the main reasons that that leg is up on that jump box, because then the hips are facing forward, and that hand, that left hand that's behind the head, is able to rotate open and focus on just the thoracic region. And that way, there is not a tilt to her shoulders. She's not just, tilting her shoulders open, so that dropping the left shoulder. She's not moving from the hip. That whole movement is from the thoracic rotation. And I'm performing these warm-up exercises with this thoracic rotation movement. What I generally do is to have them follow their breath pattern. Inhale through the nose, exhale, opening up to that side, and follow their breath, exhale, close. From that closed position facing the wall, inhale once more, exhale again. Now inhale, get prepared, and then exhale, opening up. As they're starting to move through these, that way they're able to focus and open up with their breath and their breathing patterns. So again, always let them do some warm-up movements within this area. So as we look at this, again, we just want to do a quick review about what is that inner unit and what is that outer unit. So just a quick review here about what is our inner unit and what is our outer unit. So anything with the inner unit is what is directly attached to the spine. And this is what is really going to be responsible for providing that stability and segmental control of the inner unit. So all of those inner unit muscles, those locals, are things like our multifid, our transverse abdominis, the diaphragm, and our pelvic floor. So our global muscles, more of the ones that are going to be responsible for producing our movement and our torque, and then the general stability of the body, are things such as our external obliques, the rectus abdominis, our internal obliques, and the erectors of the erector spinae area. So like I said, that's why whenever we talk about building your belt, that's your inner unit there. It focuses on activating the transverse abdominis. It also focuses on providing that stability and the segmental control and engaging that pelvic floor. So always make sure that we're starting with that inner unit first. So the one thing we want to look at is how do we progress the core? And the number one thing that we have to ensure our clients understand is what is the neutral spine. And we need to understand the neutral spine ourselves. So the first thing that I want you guys to do here is going to be to stand up. Wherever you are, go ahead and give me a quick upright stance. And I want you to take your hands and put them in at your waist so that they are resting on your hips. So right here, if you're able to look in a mirror, that's perfect. But if not, just go with me because this is how you're going to explain it to your clients. With your hands on your hips, so your hands are resting on those hip bones. What I want you to do is to give me an anterior tilt. So if your hips were a bucket of water, we are going to stick our booty up in the air, poke our chest out, so that if your hips are a bucket of water, that water is going to be spilling out the front of the bucket. So this is your anterior tilt. Now reverse it. Do your posterior tilt. We're going to curve the spine under. We're going to slouch forward so that if your hips were a bucket of water, the water would be pouring out the back. So the waistband of your pants, the back waistband should be lower than the front. Now go ahead and come back to neutral. Have your clients move through that anterior posterior tilt to help them, one, to kind of warm up the movement of the spine, and two, to help them find neutral so that they know that their hips, as a bucket of water, all of the water is contained on the inside. Now, oftentimes, if people have weak low back muscles, and things are going to be tight, such as their hip flexors, then they're going to have that booty out position. So they're going to be having that, that anterior tilt. And so if we have, some elongated and weak muscles, specifically of the lower back, then they may be having that posterior tilt. So having them move through, depending upon what their compensations are, have them move through that to help them identify what is neutral spine. Once they've been able to find that neutral spine, make sure you review with them how they build their belt in this neutral position. That is something that is really important because we want them to be able to engage and build their belt in a safe position. So always making sure that we review those fundamentals. After we found our neutral spine, then we want to talk about breathing strategies. We've got a couple of slides coming up on that in just a moment. So then, after we have those breathing strategies, we want to improve the firing sequence of the core muscles. Then we can develop through those different stages of movement and the exercises in all three of our planes. Now we want to talk about some of our breathing drills. Some of my favorite things about working with our senior clients are to really get them to breathe properly. Half the time, whenever someone is sedentary for a long period of time and they're in this very forward position where the shoulders are rounded forward, they're compressing their lungs. So if you get someone to stand up in the upright position and take a big breath in, one, they've just gotten a huge dose of oxygen to the brain. So that will make them feel automatically a lot more awake. It'll make them feel a lot more aware. So helping someone just breathe, they're going to feel 1,000 times better, and they're going to feel like they've accomplished a lot in their exercise program, and really all you did was taught them how to breathe properly. So here's what we're going to do. First thing you're going to do is inhale through the nose and expand the lungs fully. So here's what I want you to do. Get and relax, shrug your shoulders up to your ears, relax them down. Now, we're going to inhale only through the nose and expand those lungs fully. Now, as you have the fullest breath in, exhale out through your lips. Nice and slow. Pucker your lips. So it's a very pursed position with your lips, and exhale out. We're going to do this with control. And hold that exhale. Now, just whenever you think all of the air is pushed out of your lungs, exhale a little more. And a little more. Now a little more. You should feel like you're breathing fire right now as you're pushing all of that air out of your lungs. Now, slow and controlled, inhale through the nose, expand the lungs fully again. Expand, expand. So make it seem like you're really stretching all of the muscles between the ribs. Whenever you have as much air in your lungs, hold it for just a couple of seconds. Now we're going to do it again. Purse your lips, small pucker here. We're going to exhale all of the air out and keep moving. Slowly exhale. Exhale a little more. Now you think your lungs are completely empty. Keep exhaling. You're going to feel that breath of fire, that hot air. Keep breathing out. Feel like a dragon here. Now relax. Now just take a couple of normal breaths. So that's what there is called inspiratory muscle training. So whenever we're working with that interrespiratory muscles right there, I have my clients work with that muscular training. They have to take 30 of those breaths in and out. Have them focus on inhaling completely, expanding the lungs completely as much as they possibly can, and then exhaling out all of the air as much as possible. Now what we're doing here is we're working with all of those muscles in between the ribs. And this is really great because it helps them to use the full functional capacity of their lungs. You know, I don't think I've seen studies on this. I know I say it, but I don't think there's actually been studies to prove it. But if you have someone who is going to be going down further, maybe for recovery from a surgery or something, and they're worried about losing some of the progress that they've made with their cardiorespiratory training, having them focus on utilizing that IMT training, the inspiratory muscle training, is going to help them to maintain the functional capacity of their lungs. Now, here's the deal. Once they're able to complete those 30 breaths in and out through the lungs completely, then you can start to maybe add some resistance there, such as a drinking straw. Think about how hard it would be to inhale and fill the lungs completely, only using a drinking straw as the inhale motive, or even the same way as the drinking straw is the only way to exhale. Now keep in mind, you want to be able to observe some reactions within this area. So watch your clients for dizziness or even lightheadedness. Oftentimes whenever people get too much oxygen, then that will come into a little bit of dizziness. So really watch them, make sure they're in a safe seated position here. And then once they grasp the concept, then you can use the progression such as the standing and then the seated with the straw and then standing with the straw for a little bit of additional resistance. Now, I like to throw random information at you here. And here's a little bit of a fun fact. Have you ever been teaching a group fitness class and someone yawns? And you're thinking, wow, am I really doing that bad of a job that you're yawning in my class, that you're bored? Here's the deal. People yawn because they're needing additional oxygen. So after someone goes through these breathing drills, don't be shocked if you see them yawn, because that's what's happening. You know, I don't know if you've seen this shirt that says a yawn is a silent scream for coffee, but honestly, a yawn is a silent scream for oxygen. So keep in mind as they're moving through these different exercises, that may be something that you see. So how can we talk about utilizing some of these different exercises and activities here? And our first one is going to be a core stabilization. And this is going to be, we have two exercises that we're going to talk about here, both the ball squeeze and the resisted pull. So whether you're doing the squeeze or the resisted pull, our goal here is to utilize a count of 5. So you can either use the stability ball, a bender ball, even the squishy balls that you get from like a Dollar General store, the playground balls. So have your clients hold in the ball so that their forearms are around the ball, just like what you see our model doing here on this top picture. So again, we always exhale on the contraction here. So inhale through the nose, movement prep, exhale, squeeze together for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and relax. Inhale through the nose, exhale, squeeze as hard as you can, a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and relax. Make sure that your clients are not holding their breath. Oftentimes when people are straining or stretching here, or trying as hard as they can to accomplish something, their first instinct is to hold their breath and really lock down. And we don't want that. We want them to be able to be actively engaging that core, actively engaging that pelvic floor, and moving through this, utilizing the inner unit. Keep your chin up. As you drop that chin, you're already starting to decrease the amount of oxygen coming in just from positional asphyxiation, so to speak. So just make sure that you have that chin up, and that is a really big part of this. And then here's the progression that you want to look at. First, you want them to start seated in a very stable movement. Then progress to standing. And then from standing, you can even do a couple of other progressions, such as in tandem stance or even a one-legged stance if you have a very capable client. Now, our next core stabilization is the resisted pull. And that's what our client here is demonstrating for us. So you have some tubing that has handles on each side. Same thing, movement prep. Inhale through the nose. We're going to exhale on the contraction. Exhale as you pull that band apart. Think about pulling wide, pinching a pencil between your shoulder blades, and relax. Again, that's utilizing the same count of 5. Inhale through the nose, and exhale, pull apart. Really focus on holding that pencil between the shoulder blades, and relax. And the same thing, start seated, and then progress to a standing movement, and then a tandem stance, and then if you have a very capable clientele, even a one-legged stance. So here what we want to look at is how we're going to maintain this neutral core. And the first thing that we want to look at is how to put that neutral core on the C-spine area. So here we have a balloon hold. So our client is seated in a chair, and you see that the edge of that chair is up against that wall, and there's a balloon between her head and the wall. And what she's going to do is she's going to press back against that balloon in order to pull that neck back into the proper alignment. So what you're looking at here is you want to make sure that their earlobe falls directly over that clavicle. And that's the place that you want for proper alignment of the C-spine. So what they're going to do is press back against that ball and hold that position. So in the seated position is our first position, and they're going to be holding that for 5 seconds, just like they did in our previous exercise. Once they've maintained being able to hold that for 5 seconds, and then moving into a standing position, being able to stand up, notice where she's standing, the position of her body, pressing back in, pulling that neck back into position. Once they've been able to hold that position for 5 seconds, and I like to have them do a set, hold each position for 5 seconds, and repeat that approximately 8 times. After they've mastered that, then they can start to add some of the extremity actions, such as an arm lift, or arms marching in an action, or leg lifts. So here I am. I'm going to quote Jerry Maguire. The human head weighs 8 pounds. So if someone has that forward head posture, they are putting 8 pounds of pressure on just the C-spine. Now, 8 pounds doesn't sound like a whole lot. But what if I asked you to put your arm straight out in front of you like you're going to hand me something, and then I put an 8-pound weight in it, and all day for the 18 hours that you're awake, or if you're really good and you get a lot of sleep, you're only awake 16 hours. So for the 16 to 18 hours that you're awake, I make you hold that 8 pounds directly out in front of you. 8 pounds doesn't sound like a lot, right? But holding it directly out in front of you on just one arm, that's going to become ridiculously heavy. And that's what your C-spine is doing. All of those movements, every millimeter and centimeter that head is moved forward is putting pressure on that C-spine. So we want to make sure that we can pull that head back into that neutral movement. And that is really important, especially as our seniors become older and they oftentimes from that seated posture so much, then those shoulders become rounded forward. And in order to still be able to see, if your shoulders are rounded forward, you have to stick that head out. So if you sit in your chair and you round the shoulders forward, automatically your head drops, right? So if your seniors have that shoulder forward position, then they have to, in order to see in front of them, have to look up. And that puts all of that pressure on that C-spine. So this right here allows them to maintain that neutral position. So this slide right here provides you with a little bit of some ideas that once your clients have been able to maintain that neutral spine, what are some ways that we can add some arm and leg movements in? And the first one is the heel toe lift and then the march. So go ahead and come up to the edge of your chair, and I want you to stand in that nice tall position. So now that you've identified how to maintain that neutral C-spine, go ahead and get in that position. So pull that head back so that that earlobe is directly over that clavicle. So engage the inner unit. So engage that transverse abdominis, draw that pelvic floor in, and maintaining this position right here, you're probably going to feel like a goofball, but maintaining this position, now I want you to pump your arms like you're running, like you're marching here. Pump those arms. So that's harder than you think because as your shoulders move, right, it makes your head bob a little bit. So maintain that C-spine position. Maintain that pelvic floor engagement. As you started to lift the hips and the knees with the marching, did you lose your pelvic floor engagement? So it takes a couple times for them to get used to that movement with the arms. You can also do, if they can't lift, if they can't lift the legs, have them do just the heel lift. So their toes maintain the movement, or the toes maintain the contact of the floor, and the heels are the only one providing the movement here. So that's a great option. If you want something additional whenever they're in this, you can also have them start to look at maybe doing a toe lift, which is just a very small step. And honestly, I really encourage all of our seniors to actively work on toe lifts because that helps to train the anterior tibialis, or that lower front compartment of the lower leg. And oftentimes if people trip, it's because they're not picking up their toes and they're kind of dragging the toes of their feet. So if they're doing these toe lifts, they're working that anterior tibialis, they're less likely to drag their feet, to drag their toes, and then they're less likely to trip and have a fall. So I really love having my clients alternate with both the heel, the toe lifts, as well as the march while maintaining this neutral C-spine position. Sorry, I think my phone was accidentally on a mute there. I apologize. I didn't realize that y'all weren't hearing me speak until it started flashing at me. So here's another exercise that we can look at with maintaining this neutral core. Our first option here is our seated crawling here. So this is our great option. So here's what's really wonderful about this. This is one of the most challenging exercises because if you think about your seniors and how they move, oftentimes in order to lift their legs, their first instinct is to really lean back really far. So, and then they use the momentum from the leaning back to alternate. So this makes them be able to really focus on keeping that core neutral. And in order to keep that core neutral, then they're not able to round the spine. So come on up to the edge of your chair or the edge of the bench, like what our model is showing here, and think about how you would explain this to your clients. From the edge of your chair, what I want you to do is to put your hands up so that your palms are facing out and they're level with your shoulders. Now engage the core, build your belt, engage the pelvic floor. What I want you to do is to just lift the left heel and reach the right arm up, okay? Now switch, right arm up, switch, left arm up, right heel lifted, switch, left heel up, right arm lifted, switch, left arm up, right heel lifted. So moving through this now, getting your speed a little bit quicker. Now see if you can lift the legs up as you're moving. Instead of just the heel lift, see if you can actually lift the foot off the ground. Keep moving through this and relax. Now if you've actually engaged your core, building your belt, so to speak, on this exercise, then you are going to start to feel a little bit of engagement in that area. For our seniors, what you feel is a little bit of engagement, they're going to feel as a very strong core workout. So as they start to fatigue, you're going to want to look for a couple of signs of fatigue. And one is, are they holding their breath? Are they rocking and using momentum to move through the movement? And two, are they starting to shorten the movement? So as they start to move through some of those compensations, you want to be aware and have a watchful eye to see what's going on. Let them take a break, get a drink of water, and rest and regroup before restarting this position as well. Keep in mind, the number one thing that they're going to do is want to hollow out on the stomach, and that's what we want to ensure, that they are able to maintain that core position. That is really important in this exercise, and it's a great way to have a full body engagement from the movement at the shoulders, the movement at the hips, as well as the core engagement. All right, now we're going to be looking at maintaining neutral spine with some of our standing drills. Our first one is going to be the anti-extension with our isometric conditioning. So with this anti-extension drill, so what we want to look at is how we're setting this up. So that is one of the red monster bands, and that is attached to a Smith machine or an attachment hook there on the wall. So if you're working with some senior level clients, you may want to think about putting a towel around that band so that it reduces the indentation of their underarm area. So then we want to take that band, loop it around their body, so have it go over their heads, then step into it and underneath their underarms. So you're going to maintain that tabletop position, that T position that she's got as she's showing in the picture. You want just enough tension on the band so that it is pulled tight in the seated position. Then, without using momentum to rock forward, you want to instruct your client to come up, engage the core, and press straight up. So that band is going to want to pull them back. So their natural instinct is going to be to bend at the waist to pull it forward. And we want to ensure that they maintain that hip neutral position. So think about how whenever someone finishes a deadlift, how they engage those hips to be that straight position. That's what you want them to understand here. As they engage the inner unit and they rise, really press through the hips. So that way they're in that upright position and they're really resisting that that hyperextension, that anti-extension movement in this exercise. I have them, what's really important on this, I have them focus on the negative of the returning back to the seated position. And that's going to be the hardest part. So as a trainer, you want to make sure that you are standing there to help them. You may even need to take some tension off of that band as they reverse back down to that seated position, because it's going to want to pull them back so quickly, and they may not be ready as they lower down on that negative to be prepared to combat that. So that's something that is really important with this isometric conditioning drill of the anti-extension. Remember, a couple key points. utilizing a towel for additional comfort. That way it reduces that indentation of their body. You also want to have them engage the pelvic floor in the inner unit before standing to rise. Next, focus on locking out the hips so that the hips maintain neutral as well, and it's not just them hinging forward at the hips. And then lastly, focus on the negative. Really have them return to the seated position in that slow and controlled manner. Now, still looking at this, let's look at the anti-flexion, so the reverse exercise. This is basically the exact reverse of our previous drill that we just looked at with the anti-extension. So same thing, we may want to use a towel. That way it really increases the comfort level of our clientele. We want to engage the pelvic floor, engage the inner unit of the abdominal wall. And then that way, as they start to rise from the seated position, as in the picture, that first picture, then we want to make sure that they're able to focus on displacing their weight all throughout their foot. So that's something that's going to be really important. So as they start to move up, same thing happens. You know, this is going to be now that they've stood up, whenever they come to that neutral position, now they're going to want to lean back and go into that hyperextension. And that's something that we really want them to focus on not doing. So as we start to move through these different exercises, the negative of this one isn't going to be quite as difficult or as trying for them, because they're going to be able to sit back into it. So you may be thinking, you know, hey, I don't know if I have a client that can really safely, I'm comfortable with them moving through this fit to stand with this anti-flexion drill. And that's what our second picture is right here. You can have them just gently walk back and step back against resistance of that band and maintain that grounded position and that neutral position and just stand there for an anti-flexion drill as well. They do not necessarily have to be performing that sit-to-stand exercise. So those are a couple of great options for you to work through as you're moving into this drill. Now we want to look at maybe the side options of our anti-lateral flexion options. So as we look at this drill here, focusing on our anti-lateral flexion, we want to look at really being able to maintain this upright position and this upright posture. And this is really a great way, if you think about it, to challenge the body of your activities of daily living. So like I said, been in Chicago for about 10 years. We were there, and the one thing that is the craziest thing about Chicago is the wind tunnels. So it is the windy city for a number of reasons, but one is definitely the wind. And that's something that is great, because whenever you're walking, that wind can stop you in your tracks because it's so strong. So this is something that provides your body a way to right its ship, so to speak, in order to maintain the upright posture and positioning. So our first option is in this nice and seated position. So she is seated there, and her second movement is to stand up right from that box, just like we've been doing with the anti-flexion and anti-extension drills. So here's the deal. And if you think about where the pull is, this is going to be a lot harder for one leg than the other. So make sure that you're providing both sides, that they're facing both directions with this exercise. But the exact same principles apply. So utilize the towel to maintain comfort for your clients. Inhale through the nose. Exhale, and then as they stand up, with that fit to stand, slowly rise. Make sure that their inner unit and their pelvic floor is engaged. And then as they start to reverse and sit back down on that box, slow and controlled is the name of the game. So again, if you have clients that are not able to safely perform the sit to stand exercise, then you are definitely welcome to have them perform just this isometric of just the standing right here that our model is showing you. And you can have them challenge the strength of the band by taking small steps left and right in order to change the tension of the band. Also, if you want to add an additional challenge, then you're definitely welcome to have them walk, because walking would add an additional layer within that anti-lateral flexion opportunity and options. So this is one of my favorite drills that you will probably ever do. And I think that it has great options in both the senior world, but also in any world. Because here's the deal. This is something that is going to be so beneficial. And this is something that is going to be one of those exercises that really helps people to understand how to hold their body whenever outside forces are acting on it. So the first is our seated position, and we're going to be working this transverse abdominis in this exercise. So what I want you to do is to go ahead and get in the seated position that you're going to be seeing our model in right now. So our arms are straight out, our palms are pressed together, and what you're going to do is I want you to build that belt. So engage the pelvic floor, engage the transverse abdominis, so lock that lowest rib to the hip bone, but don't crunch forward. Now that everything's engaged, sit up nice and tall and upright. Make sure that those shoulders are far down and away from the ears. So first thing that I want the client to do, which is you right now, is to just press against your palms together. Like try to squish a grate between those palms, maintaining that engagement of the transverse abdominis and the pelvic floor, okay? Now that they have that position, which is what I call creating the tension in your arms, now have them relax, shake it out, go and relax and shake it out. Then what I have them to do is to maintain that position again. So create the tension in their arms. Remember, their pelvic floor is engaged, their transverse abdominis is engaged. Now, as the trainer, you are going to be pressing against their arms. So the first thing that you're going to do is to press their hands to the left. So both of your hands are on the right side of their hands and press it towards the left. And they have to resist that. I do this for a count of 5 and relax. And then I move over to the left side, pressing them to the right. Press against that for a count of 5 and then relax. Then I let them stop. Have a small break, shake it out, just nice and relaxed. Then what I have them do is to get back in that position, okay? Now you're going to do is pushing from the top and the bottom. So they've created tension in the arms, the transverse abdominis is engaged, the pelvic floor is engaged. Now press down. They cannot allow those arms to drop. Press down. Count of 5 and relax. Now go up underneath their hands and press up. They have to maintain the tension in the arm, that straight position. Don't let those arms fall up. They have to maintain that straight level position and relax for their count of 5. And then I keep reviewing that. And I keep going in all of those different directions. And I mix it up. I don't just go left, right, up, down. Sometimes I will cup my hands around their hands so they don't know which way the engagement is going to be coming from. And that's probably one of my favorite things to do within this exercise in this area, is to really be able to add the element of surprise with it. Now, if you want an additional challenge, blindfold them. I know that doesn't seem like it's going to be that difficult, but you're also challenging some of the other systems by adding that blindfold to them that they don't exactly know what they're doing, which way the direction is coming from, so they have to maintain that engagement and that core stability as you're moving through those different exercises. This is one of my favorite drills. Like I said, it works for all populations, but it's really essentially beneficial for our seniors to help them to maintain that core function and that core stability. Now let's look at moving that standing, that rotation drill up to the standing position. So you're probably thinking, what is going to be the positive sides about doing some of these rotation drills seated and standing? And one is it helps them to understand once you move up to the standing position about what all you can do to combat. So this one is a little bit difficult, a little bit different, and we're going to talk through a number of ways that you can accomplish this because there's a ton of ways that you can do the standing anti-rotational drill. So one, just like what we talked about whenever he's seated, one thing that you can do is have them stand. Again, engage the transverse abdominis, engage the pelvic floor, create the tension in their arms, and then in that standing position, do the same thing. So you push on the left for a count of 5, relax, push on the right for a count of 5, relax, let them shake it out, press up for a count of 5, relax, press down for a count of 5, and relax. Then this is where you have a lot more options to look at with our standing opportunities here. So something that you can have them do is to change their footwork. So originally, you're standing with your hips directly over your feet. Then you can do that same anti-rotational drill, but in a staggered stance. So one foot, right foot is forward, left foot is back, same thing. Now you're probably thinking about why would this be a big deal? Go ahead and stand up where you are. I'm going to show you. Now it's a little bit harder to do on webinars, but staggered stance. So our right foot is forward, still hip width apart. Our left foot is in our standard position underneath the hip. Go ahead, draw in the transverse abdominis, engage the pelvic floor. Now extend the arms out, create the tension in your arms. This is where it gets difficult. If the trainer puts his hands on the left side of the hand, it's no big deal because he's pushing against essentially the right leg that is forward, so you can resist it a lot easier. But with that right leg forward, if the trainer puts his hands on the right hand, the right side of the client's hands and presses against, then you're pushing more to that open stance, and they're much more likely to fall. So this is a great way of having them work with that staggered stance of the right leg forward and then switching in the left leg forward to still engage the different areas. So I love the staggered stance for that reason, pardon me. Now you're ready and want to take it one step further, the next thing that you can do is to go ahead and stand in tandem. So we're going to switch our feet since we did right leg forward on the last one. Now I want you to put your right foot down, put your left heel directly in line with your right toes. That way you are standing heel to toe, okay, which is perfect. Nice stance, nice soft bend in the knees. That's what I was going to try to go for. Not nice stance, nice soft bend in the knees. Now, same thing, engage the transverse abdominis, draw in the pelvic floor. Now extend those arms out, create the tension in the arms, same thing. Now look at how much more difficult it is to maintain this upright posture whenever you're in a tandem stance. So as the trainer, you don't have to use a lot of pressure in order to engage these different opportunities with your clients. So that is the way that you can look at taking the anti-rotation drill from the seated movement up to the standing. Now another option, because I told you there are a lot of options that you can do with these anti-rotation drills. Another option that you can do, and this is actually one of my favorites, is to utilize this band like what you're seeing our model do in the picture. As with the seated drill, again, this is one of my favorite opportunities. And think about your clients. Think about your least capable client and your most capable client. So now that we've utilized this tubing with the handle, we've secured it to the pole like what you're seeing in the picture, here's what I would want you to do. So take enough steps away that tubing is engaged and there's a lot of tension on it. Not so much that they can't maintain the posture, but they're going to hold this position right here. Again, we're going to engage the transverse abdominis, draw in the pelvic floor. Now what I want you to have your clients do, and this is going to be the thing that to really work on that anti-rotational, is to just take a small step back with their right foot. Now return back 2 feet together. Now take a small step back with their left foot. and return back, 2 feet together. Now right foot goes forward, 2 feet together. Left foot goes forward, 2 feet together. Here's our challenge now. If possible, have them do a reverse lunge. Right foot reverse lunges back, small bend down, and rise back to the beginning position. Now our left leg lunges back, small lower, and rise up to that beginning position. Now, I don't ever have them do with banded the forward lunge because I think the deceleration is more important. But what I have them do now is to take the left leg, so they're drawing even more tension on the band, left leg steps out, small squat, stand up. Here's where we're going to face that negative and return back to start. Now, stop, relax, shake it out, and face the other way so that now the line of pull is on the opposite side of their body. That's something you want to make sure that you're focusing on balance as you're moving through these different exercises. So that's a number of different ways that you can take the anti-rotational drills from both the seated to the standing and from a variety of an engaged manner. Let's look at what we have next. Now we're going to look at how we can integrate our core conditioning using stability balls and a couple of different bouncing techniques. Now there's a number of different items that we're going to be talking about with this stability ball bounce. And the thing that this is going to be great is because this is going to be challenging our participants on a number of different levels. So one, we're going to be looking at hand and eye coordination. We're going to be looking at things like strength to be able to maybe roll or to bounce, similar to a chest press. So these are things that we can really look at from a few different standpoints. So our first option is to pair people up and have them roll or bounce or lightly toss the ball to one another. So this is a great thing is these balls are usually pretty small. It's not really going to be generated with enough force to really knock someone over. And being able to pair people up is you're able to really to vary the distance based on what those two people feel comfortable with. So what I have them do is I play music and have them just alternate either rolling, bouncing, or throwing the ball to each other. And then I stop the music and they have to shuffle and find a new partner. Kind of like what you're thinking about with like musical chairs. So this way we're not only utilizing some core conditioning from being able to engage the transverse abdominis, the pelvic core, and work with that extremity movement, but now once the music stops, then what they have to do is to shuffle and move to a different location. The reason that that's important is that because it causes them to release everything. So now suddenly their core isn't engaged because they're focused on something else. They're focused on finding a new partner. So now when the music comes back on, and you may have to cue them to do this for the first couple of times, it causes them to re-engage everything. So now they have to engage that transverse abdominis again. They have to draw in that pelvic floor again. So there's really a great way to get them used to how the world would happen. Because think about it. Whenever somebody is, thinking about public transportation in Chicago, people may be on a bus and they're in a great position and they're holding onto the bar, but then they get a phone call and the train's at a stop at a different, one of the stops. So they pull out their phone, they're talking on their phone, they're completely distracted, and now the door's closed and the train's about to take off. They have to figure out how to get back in to that stabilized position. And this right here is what we're doing. We are mimicking that movement here. So another option that you can utilize here is to put participants in a circle. So right here we have 6 people in this room, and we're going to put all 6 people in one circle. And they're able to roll or bounce the ball to one another. So the goal here is to do this at random. So I'm going to give you about 3 different ways that you can do this. So the first one that you can do is have them follow a pattern so they remember. So they're going to, whoever, as a trainer, you started out, so you throw it to person number 1. Then person number 1 throws it to person number 2. Person number 2 throws it to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 back to the trainer. Now they have to mimic that pattern, but they also have to be aware because you're going to add in an additional ball. So as soon as the trainer throws it to person number 1, once that ball hits and gets to person number 3, then the trainer tosses person number 1 another ball. So you can have them call out a name before they roll it or bounce it to the person to help with their cognitive ability. You can have them do that, or you can have them tossing the ball to each other and the trainer is calling out a name of a person. So as the trainer, you throw it to person number 1 sitting there holding the ball, and you call out somebody's name. Number 1 throws it to that person. That person then holds the ball, you call out somebody else's name. They toss it to that person or roll or bounce to that person. So the reason that that is important is because it's action and reaction. So they're having to take a little bit of information coming into their brain, compute that information, and then toss the ball. So if you talk about, you know, brains and stability and how some of that motor neurons react to focus on stabilization, this is a great exercise that you can utilize to help them use the cognitive functioning in order to still maintain some of that mental quickness and mental sharpness. So another option is our last and our third one that I'll give you here. So instead of the trainer, you know, calling out the name and whatnot, everybody's in a circle, then you put one participant in the center. So they go back and forth and throwing it back and forth. So that participant is in the center. Center person throws it to person 1, 1 throws it back to the center. Center throws it to 2, 2 throws it to center. Center throws it to 3, all the way back through the entire amount of people. Then you can add a little bit of a cognitive drill to this. Go with me. It sounds difficult, but it's really easy. So the person in the center will throw the ball to them and say a color. Literally, they say the word color. So when the person catches it, before they can throw it back, they have to state a color: blue, purple, yellow, green, and then they throw it back to the center. Then the center throws it to the second person and yells shape. So before the second person can throw the ball back, they say things like triangle, circle, octagon, rhombus. Then they throw it back. Then they throw it to the third person and they say something crazy like, you know, fruit, and they have to name an apple, an orange, or something of that. So that way, it's a really great cognitive function idea for people to be challenging a couple of the different systems of the body. So this gives you a couple of ideas of some ways that you can integrate the core conditioning in the stability ball bounce with not just being the same run-of-the-mill drills. So like I said, in person, these are really easy to run through. So I thank you for sticking with me as we explain these through a couple of different avenues. So here, we are going to be really drawing in some of our favorite options from what I call pageant training, which is how to walk in an appropriate manner with our chin in a great area. So the first thing that I want you guys to do here is to think about how you're going to have them stand and to get them in that standing position. So let's review a little bit. Go ahead and stand up. The first thing that we want them to do is, in order to maintain the neutral spine walking drill, we need to review within the neutral spine. How are we going to have them move in order to find the neutral spine so that no water spills out the front of the bucket or out of the back of the bucket? So in a standing position, our hands are on our hips. Have your client practice tilting forward and tilting back until they find that neutral spine position. Then go and bring it up the body. Once their hips are in neutral spine, have them ensure that they have pulled their chin back to really maintain a neutral C-spine position. Once they have found that position, then they're going to put that block on top of their head, like what you see in the picture. From here, now that the block is on their head, they're going to engage the pelvic floor, engage the transverse abdominis in order to make this in their supported and neutral position. Now, you have them walk throughout the room. The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to need to be walking really slow. So granted, a lot of people's first instinct is to be looking down at the ground. So this is really going to take a lot for them to fight to not look down as they're moving throughout the room. Second, you'll notice that they're using tables here for stability. You can have them use tables, have them use the wall if they need to, so they can run through a couple of different options in order to use this. Now you're probably thinking this sounds really simple, and it is. So now let's talk about ways that we can really challenge this exercise for our different clients. And what I like to do with this is to play red light, green light. So you have them walk either through the obstacle course around these tables, so maybe they're doing an S pattern snaking around the tables, or maybe they have to walk and touch one corner of the room, walk diagonal, touch the second corner of the room. So whatever the distance is that they're walking, I have them do the drill. So I say green light, and they take off walking either the S pattern of the tables or walking across the room. And then I say red light. And the goal is they have to be able to stop on a dime. So here's the thing, though, is they have to maintain that neutral posture, because oftentimes when people stop, their body kind of shifts forward a little bit. So this provides them a way to fight that urge and also to maintain the neutral spine position and keep that block of wood up on their head. So that's something that is really important to kind of add in different challenges. Also, in addition to just the plain walking, you can have them do things like marching so that they're lifting their legs up in place a little bit higher while holding onto those tables for stability. So those are a couple of ways that you can really try to provide an extra challenge for your different clients as they're moving through this neutral spine walking drill. Now, those are just, I think those are called 2x4s, and maybe, yeah, they're 2x4s. On this exercise here is what they're using. So you can use anything, because it may be difficult to find that many books that are light enough, paperback books, to not really provide a lot of weight, but also enough weight so you don't have to worry about it sliding off their head. So that gives you a couple of options and ideas to incorporate the neutral spine walking drill into your classes or incorporating it with your different clientele. All right, let's look at the unilateral farmer's walk, and then also our other exercise is our trunk rotation. So I love this unilateral farmer's walk because, number one, this is one of those real life exercises, and people do not understand why. Here's the deal. How often does somebody carry a handbag or maybe groceries on one side as they're walking? And also, here's the deal. When you are carrying those, you almost always carry it in your dominant hand. So this is a chance right here to be able to work on focusing on balance and keeping your body being able to maybe challenge that one side that does not generally pick up the handbag or the grocery bag. So this is the same thing that you can have them do. You can have them walk in a straight line for a predetermined distance, stop, turn around, and then return on this farmer's walk. So here's what I want you to think of. So this arm out is providing extra stability and support. As they're walking, what I want you to make sure your clients are doing is to maintain the level shoulder position. People want to really hip hike up a lot whenever they're utilizing this exercise, and that is what we want to avoid. So they may need to be taking smaller steps, slow and controlled, and that is a great teaching point because you can teach them to increase the proprioception of their feet. Really focus on walking heel to toe. Really focus on having them lift up the toe, engage that anterior tibialis in the lower compartment of the leg. Have them walk down, turn around, change directions, and return to the start. Then have them switch sides so that the weight now is on their non-dominant hand, walk down, turn around and return to start. So it seems really simple, and you're right, it is. So let's talk about a couple of ways that we can add in some additional challenges with this unilateral farmer's walk. One, the easiest thing to have them do is to also play red light, green light with this. So, you know, you say, green light, go, and they take off. And then whenever you say red light, stop, they have to stop on a dime without allowing the body to go forward, without dropping their shoulders, or without dropping the weight. Then green light, go, they take off again until they reach the end. You provide them any red light stops that you may want them to have, and then they turn around and come back to the start. So that's a great way to do if you have people in a large class for a group fitness class. That's kind of a fun drill. You could put the class into different teams where they play red light, green light, down and back, pass the weight off, and they have to go everybody down on the right side, and then everybody goes down and back on the left side. So it's a great way. It eats up a lot of time in a group fitness setting, which I always enjoy with some of our senior clientele. That way they're able to cheer on their friends as they move through some of these different exercises. That is the easiest challenge to add, is the red light, green light. The second challenge, if you want a much more difficult challenge for them to engage, is to have them engage in a tandem walk. So basically, what you're going to want them to do is to walk heel to toe. And you can either have them walk heel to toe, or you can take a piece of painter's tape and put down on the floor. That way they have to follow that tape. So if you want them to walk tandem, heel to toe, that's one option. Or they can walk normally and maintain their feet on that one line as they move down and back. So that provides you a couple of ways that you can utilize that unilateral farmer's walk and a couple of different challenges that they can use. Now let's chat a little bit about the trunk rotation. So I know that this picture doesn't really provide because of the angle, so I'm going to give you a little hint here. This cable cross machine in the back, there is a cable right here, and you can see that this handle is in his hand. So this is just like a standard rotation. The emphasis should be on using the hips and the shoulders as the mover. You do not want to use the lumbar spine to twist this. You want to use the hips and the shoulders as your prime movers here. So the great thing about this, again, generating that force is wonderful because that is one of our main goals of the core is to, link the movements. So whenever we're using the hips and the shoulders to generate that force, the great part is the negative as it returns. So as that negative starts to want to pull us back, this is essentially another arm of an anti-rotational drill that you want to be working the negative on for this. A couple of movements here is you want to make sure that they are not using the lumbar spine as the prime mover. You also want to make sure that this is a slow and controlled movement. Try to make sure that they are not using momentum, that their feet aren't having to pick up and re-step in order to maintain their balance. If things like that are going on, if they aren't able to maintain their balance or they're having to move their feet a lot, or if they're using the lumbar spine, then realize that you need to go back to the basics for this movement, and you need to really be able to focus on moving safely without loading them. So if you see any of those things happening, not able to keep their balance, repositioning their feet, or the lumbar spine is the prime mover, then that is your cue to take this back a notch and to teach the basic rotational movement unloaded first. All right, these are some of my favorite exercises. I know y'all probably think I say that on every exercise, and coincidentally, these are a lot of my favorites, but this is what is really great about this, is because this is a band-resisted slam. So we have a couple of different ways that we are focusing on this. So one, you notice that she has a band right around her hips. Again, same rules apply. You may need to be getting a towel or something in order to place around their hips in order to maintain the level of comfort. So we're going to take this in a progression. So our first progression, because they've already worked with the, anti-flexion and anti-extension drills of this. So now that they've done it, up within around their arms, now this is on their hips. So you want them to be able to focus on being able to fully extend their hips now against this. And you want to look at that as one of our drills whenever we're looking at some of the, anti-flexion and anti-extension drills. So as we're looking at this, you want to get them in the band. Now you want to have them stand up, maintain that full neutral position at the hips, so a fully extended hip. Now, still nothing else is in your hand. Have them get used to reaching up high and even going up on their toes. So this is your step one. Step one is have them get used to being in that band and reaching up and going up on their toes. Reach high and return back to the start. And we repeat that through about 8 times. Up on the toes, reach high, and then return back to the start, which is our flat-footed position. The reason being is the second that they reach up high with their arms overhead, they're basically changing their center of gravity. And this is giving them a chance for their body to be able to adjust to that and really be able to learn about how to maintain their balance and engage their core to complete that activity. Then, now what we're going to do is we're going to put some weight in their hand. So they're not going to slam the ball yet. All they're going to do is be holding that ball. So the band is on them. They're going to extend the band up and overhead, fully extend those hips, up on their toes, and then return back to start, lowering the band down to their chest level. That's their start position. So basically all you're doing is doing a nice, slow and controlled overhead press with this weighted ball. This is our next step. So I have them do that about 8 times or so until they're comfortable with it. And then we move into the resisted ball slam. Holding the ball, when they're ready, they reach up, extend the ball up and overhead, up on the toes. Then they exhale as they hinge at the hips, bringing the hands down and slamming that ball down on the ground. Now you'll notice that this is a rather large ball. You do not want them to utilize a really light ball. So the reason is because that may pop back up at them depending upon how far down they bend. Now here's a couple points that I want you to think about as they're moving through this ball slam. When they bend those hips and slam that ball down, that is going to really want to pull them back because that's where their anchor point is with that band. So it's going to be really important that they understand how to change that movement up and resist that exercise and resist that, that negative. So a couple of ways that you can move through that. That's your nice, safe progression to utilize those ball slams. Now we're going to talk about our band-resisted squat and toss. So very similar. Just like what we did with the ball slam, you're going to be holding that ball, and then you're going to have them bend down, what you see in this picture. When they're ready, they're going to stand up and as explosive as possible, throw that ball in the air as far as possible. So the one thing is this is a great total body exercise because not only are we getting the, the sit to stand, the seated position with the squat here, but we're also getting a great ability to engage those shoulder muscles. Also, this is how your body moves. So when we talk about how we want to train the core in the different planes, this is a great example. So here what we've done is we're adding in that extremity movement, and the extremity movement is actually even weighted. So this is a great option of what we want to do. Again, after they go through with the squat and they explode up and they toss, whenever they return back to just standing normal, that band is going to want to really pull them back with that negative position. So make sure that that's something that you want to review with your clients about what to expect. And just like what we talked about a little bit earlier, your client or the trainer may want to hold on to that band a little bit in order to, after they toss the ball, reduce that negative. So you know your clients, you know what's best, so that's something to think about whenever you're working within their area. All right, now let's look at our last exercise. Our last exercise is our band-resisted chest press. So again, this is one of those great exercises that we are taking a movement that they probably do all day, and we are putting this into a gym. So a way that we can engage and help them understand how to engage the core in these everyday activities. Think about whenever you go through a rotating door. Anybody ever have a difficulty pushing that rotating door, especially getting them started? So this is a great exercise that we can help our clients utilize to really see how they're going to be able to engage the entire body with this. So same thing, but now instead of all of our other exercises have been going in a vertical, this is a more of a horizontal exercise. So you'll see how Mike is set up with our model here. So they get in that nice, soft, ready position. So whenever they're in that ready position, that band is going to be pulling them back. So as they get into this soft bend and the hinge at the hips, as they go down, then that band really pulls off a lot of the, releases a lot of the tension. Then when they stand up, and almost like I said, it's very similar to a deadlift, how they are going to go to that full hip extension and press that ball forward at the trainer, then that is what's going to be our explosive movement. Now here's the deal. Take them through this exercise. It's kind of more like a hip thrust movement. Take them through this exercise with that hip extension there without utilizing the chest pass first, because you want them to understand what it's like for their hips to move back, to hinge at the hips, and to come forward in that forceful hip extension pattern. Then once they've gotten used to doing a small hip hinge and standing up, going into the full extension with the hips, pressing the arms forward, then they can move into the progression of holding on to that ball, and then get used to and comfortable with passing that ball to the client or to the trainer. Once the trainer catches it, step back over and hand it to them. Don't throw that ball back at them. That's a very important piece I want to make sure that we talk about. So that's something that you want to have them go through. With this exercise, it is really, really important that you are constantly cueing them, that whenever they are doing their ready position with the hip hinge and the soft knee, and slowly getting in the ready position with that bend down, that they're able to engage the pelvic floor and engage the transverse abdominis. Then whenever they exhale and extend the arms out in that chest pass, at that end movement, you want to make sure that everything is still engaged. Oftentimes when they do that explosive movement, they lose sight of that engagement. So that's why the practice before without giving them a ball is really imperative, because you want them to understand how they're going to be moving through that exercise, maintaining that core engagement all throughout. Even though we did not put the pictures in here, you can do these things with the rotational tosses, with both the pass as well as with the band-resisted rotational tosses. So they can just do a simple rotational toss pass to the trainer, or they can do the band-resisted rotational toss. Remember, you want to train both right and left side equally. So that gives you a couple of more options that they can work through for these different exercises. And with that being said, that completes our webinar. So what I want you to do now is to get ready to complete your continuing education and receive your continuing education certificate. Now that you have viewed the complete webinar, please make sure that your printer is on. and log on to our website at www.exerciseetc. You're going to see a tab that says Administration, so click on that tab. And then what I want you to do is to click on the Webinar On Demand certificates. Complete all of the required fields that you're going to need, and then click Submit. Once you have done that, your continuing education certificate will appear on the screen. So at that point, you can either save your certificate to the desktop and email it to yourself. That way you have it in a couple different locations, or you can print it. But you have to make sure that you complete this form and save your continuing education certificate right after completing this webinar. So as I previously said, I always give you guys my email address. Let me get you in a color that you're going to be able to read here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is my name, aprilboulter@gmail.com. And I know that that's small, but I'll say it again for you, aprilboulter@gmail.com. So if you have any questions about anything we talked about, or we talked about the movement screen guide and you want a copy of them, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer any questions that I may, or give any information out that I can. All right. Please note that you need to complete this webinar and print the certificate by December 31st of this year. So certificates with next year's date may not be accepted by your credentialing organization. So if you do not save your certificate and you contact Exercise, etc. for replacement, please note that there is a charge for that replacement. So we want to make sure that everyone does this directly after completing this webinar. Depending upon your certification, you may need to complete our post-course learning assessment. So this assessment must only be completed if you are certified by BOC, CSCS, or NSCA. So after you complete the post-learning assessment, an answer key will follow, and please keep both the assessment and your results in your recertification file with your continuing education certificate. If you are audited, you will need to be able to show all of those different pieces. That completes all of our information for the evening on our Never Too Late Functional Core Training for Seniors webinar. Again, my name is April Boulter. I appreciate you spending your last 2 hours with me. And if you have any questions or you need any assistance, please do not hesitate to contact me. I've given you my email address again one more time, aprilboulter@gmail.com. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.